Willow Creek, Montana. The kind of town where the morning fog rolls in soft over the hills, where neighbors wave at each other from their porches, and where nothing ever really happens. Or so it seems. But on May 14th, 2024, at exactly 5:46 a.m., that illusion shattered with one frantic phone call. A woman's voice, sharp with panic and disbelief, cut through the dispatcher's headset. "My husband, he's not moving, he's in the garage. I think he's dead." Her name? Linda Grayson. Her voice? Cracking, breathless, like someone clinging to the last thread of denial. Emergency units rushed to 1638 Buttermill Drive, a tidy single-story home nestled between a row of pines and a silent cul-de-sac. They expected a medical emergency, a heart attack, a fall, something natural. But what they found was anything but. Inside the detached garage, sprawled face down near a workbench, lay Carter Grayson, age 45. The man was cold to the touch, lifeless. Blood had pooled beneath his head, and a gaping wound to his left temple spoke of violence, not accident. And yet, nothing else in the room was out of place. The tools on the pegboard? Still perfectly aligned. The floor? Clean. No overturned chairs. No signs of a struggle. No forced entry. No broken glass. No mess. It was almost too quiet. Linda, still in her robe, told officers she'd fallen asleep watching TV in the living room. She claimed she didn't hear a thing. Not a bang. Not a scream. She only discovered Carter when she went into the garage that morning to fetch a bag of dog food. She was on the surface cooperative, but vague. She couldn't account for her movements between 10 p.m. and dawn. Her eyes darted. Her hands trembled. Inside the house were her two teenage children from a previous marriage. Mason Grayson, 19, a college freshman home for the semester break, and Emily Grayson, 17, a high school senior weeks away from graduation. Both were found in their bedrooms. Both claimed they had slept through the night. Protocol dictated they be separated and interviewed. Mason appeared calm, if a bit detached. He said he'd gone to bed around midnight after studying. Heard nothing. Saw nothing. Emily, on the other hand, was different. She flinched when addressed. She kept her eyes down. Her voice barely carried above a whisper, and her hands trembled visibly. Was it shock? Was it guilt? Or was it something deeper? Investigators began to ask a chilling question. If Carter was attacked, who had the motive? Because this wasn't some random break-in. No valuables were missing. No signs of an outsider. This felt personal. But the scene was eerily clean, too clean for a violent death. And with the family inside the house all night, suspicion couldn't help but fall inward. That's when the detectives began digging, looking for surveillance, witnesses, clues outside the walls of the Grayson home. And what they uncovered would change everything. Just behind the Grayson house lived an older couple, the Atwoods, who had a motion-activated security camera pointing toward the alley and garbage bins. At 12:16 a.m., just after midnight, the footage showed a figure, slim, hoodie pulled up, pacing nervously. That figure, the detectives would later confirm, looked exactly like Emily Grayson. She was carrying something long, maybe a pipe, or a bat, or a hammer. She walked to the garbage bins, knelt, and hid the object behind a stack of flattened boxes. Then she looked around and walked back toward the house. The entire sequence lasted less than 2 minutes. When officers searched the bins later that morning, they found it. A 12-pound framing hammer, bloodied, partially wrapped in cardboard, hidden beneath loose refuse. The blood on it was fresh. Right then and there, the case shifted. What had started as a mysterious death was now officially classified as a homicide. And the question burned hotter than ever. What happened inside that house? And why had no one said a word? The hammer was the turning point. Bloodstained, heavy, hidden in trash. No fingerprints were visible on the handle, but forensic teams worked swiftly. They swabbed for trace DNA, fibers, skin cells. And while they processed it, detectives turned back toward the house with renewed suspicion. They had a dead man, a murder weapon, and now, the unspoken tension inside the Grayson household was beginning to feel palpable. The first real break came when they ran a preliminary luminol test inside the home. They weren't expecting a bloodbath. There wasn't one. But they were looking for drops, traces, the invisible truth. The living room, hallway, kitchen, nothing. But in Emily's bedroom, they found something that would set the investigation on fire. On a gray sweatshirt, crumpled in the corner of her closet, was a faint red-brown smear. It wasn't large, but it was enough. Preliminary testing showed it was blood and not hers. Investigators collected the sweatshirt and expedited testing. But even before the lab results came back, they had already begun piecing together a theory. It wasn't just about who did it. It was becoming a question of why. Detectives went back to Linda Grayson, the mother, and gently began to press. Did Carter have any enemies? No. Did he have a temper? A long pause. He drank. Sometimes. He'd get angry. But I didn't think. Her voice trailed off. Then came the second pause, longer, heavier. I didn't think he'd ever hurt the kids. And just like that, the wall of silence began to crack. That evening, both Mason and Emily were taken into protective custody. It wasn't yet an arrest. Not officially, but the investigators needed them separated. Isolated. Observed. At the police station, they sat in separate rooms, each with a social worker and a detective. The cameras rolled. The recorders clicked on. Mason stayed cool. Controlled. He repeated what he said before. I got home from class. Went to bed. Didn't hear anything. Emily? She was still shaken. But something had changed. Her hands weren't trembling anymore. Her answers were sharper. Shorter. No. I didn't see anything. No. I didn't hear anything. I don't know. But her eyes told a different story. Detective Nolan Pierce, a seasoned investigator with 20 years on the force, later said, it was like watching someone building a dam inside themselves. Every answer was a brick. Every silence was mortar. And yet, the pieces were falling into place outside those rooms. Security footage, Emily, out at 12:16 a.m., hiding the hammer. Sweatshirt, a match to the blood of Carter Grayson. Scene, no break-in. No forced entry. No noise. Family dynamics. A silent storm brewing under one roof. The police knew what it looked like, but what they didn't know was why. That's when they made the next discovery. In Emily's room, hidden not in a locked drawer or under the mattress, but inside a school binder labeled geometry, they found a stack of handwritten notes. Dozens of pages, some scribbled on the backs of homework, others torn from spiral notebooks. One dated just 2 weeks before Carter's death read, he slammed the door so hard my lamp broke. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to set him off. Another read. He waits until Mom is gone. I stay in my room with the chair against the door. I don't think he sleeps. Some pages had simple lines, over and over again. Don't make a sound. Don't let him see you cry. Don't trust Mom to help. They were notes, but they were also cries for help. Linda, when shown the writings, broke down in tears. I thought she was being dramatic. I didn't know it was this bad. She confessed to a single 911 call back in November 2021 after Carter had pushed her during an argument. She never pressed charges. She said she wanted to keep the family together. The incident had been logged and closed. Just another missed opportunity. The tragedy was no longer just about a man killed in a garage. It was about a system that failed, a family that lived in fear, a silence that had gone on too long. The medical examiner's report arrived the next morning. Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the left temple. Injury pattern, consistent with a framing hammer. Estimated time of death, between 11:45 p.m. and 12:15 a.m. A perfect match to the timeline from the security footage. Now there was no doubt. This was murder, and someone inside that house, maybe more than one, had been involved. That afternoon, Emily Grayson was arrested for tampering with evidence. Mason was held for further questioning. And outside the Willow Creek Police Department, a storm was brewing. It was no longer just a murder investigation. It was a descent into the darkness of a home that had, for too long, hidden behind closed curtains and polite smiles. As Emily Grayson sat in a juvenile holding cell and Mason remained in interview custody, the detectives began connecting threads that had, until now, only whispered through the pages of a teenage girl's journal. And those whispers were turning into screams. April 22nd. One of the Notes app entries pulled from Emily's phone, time-stamped 11:43 p.m., read, "He won't stop. I told Mom. She told me to be quiet." Short, devastating, impossible to ignore. But that was only the beginning. Digital forensics recovered over 30 separate entries, typed late at night, sometimes within minutes of each other. Some were chillingly brief. "I hear him in the hallway. I don't sleep when he's drunk." The doorknob rattled for a full minute. Others were longer, more emotional. "I think I might go crazy. I can't breathe when he stands in the doorway. I feel like my lungs shut down." Each entry painted a portrait of a girl cornered, suffocated, terrified in her own home. But they weren't just the ramblings of a scared teenager. These entries were backed by real-world evidence. Her school counselor, Mrs. Jennings, had submitted multiple internal concern reports between 2023 and 2024. One noted, "Emily appears increasingly detached, avoids eye contact, no longer participates in extracurricular activities, frequent fatigue in morning sessions." Another, dated March 2024, student requested a private meeting, stated she hates going home and feels unsafe when mother is not present. No direct allegations made, but signs are deeply concerning. But without concrete disclosures and with no physical signs of abuse at the time, the school was powerless to escalate it further. Still, they had tried. And now, all of those red flags, waved for years, were being revisited under the cold spotlight of a murder case. Meanwhile, back in the interview room, Mason Grayson's silence began to crack. Detective Nolan Pierce approached carefully. He wasn't after confession. Not yet. He was after truth. And sometimes, truth isn't shouted. Sometimes, it's whispered through tears. Mason sat for nearly an hour in silence. He fiddled with his hands. He stared at the table. And then he said, almost inaudibly, "She came into my room. She was crying. I didn't know what to do. That was it. The dam burst." He told detectives that Emily had come to him around 11:40 p.m., shaking and breathless. She said Carter had tried to come into her room. She didn't think he knocked. She didn't think he was sober. According to Mason, she said she locked the door, but he was already inside. He described a pattern, not just one night, but a string of incidents. Nights when Emily would text him from across the house. Nights when she would sleep with her closet light on. Nights when she didn't sleep at all. "I knew something was wrong," Mason said, "but I didn't have proof." So that night, he snapped. He went into the garage where he knew Carter kept a bottle of bourbon tucked behind a toolbox. I wanted to confront him, just to say, "Leave her alone." That's all. But Carter was already drunk, already angry. And when Mason tried to speak up, he got in my face, started yelling, told me I had no business telling him how to run his house. That's when Mason saw it, the hammer. He turned toward me. I don't know why I grabbed it, but I did. And then he paused. I swung. The impact was fatal. Mason said it wasn't meant to kill, only to stop him. He panicked. He froze. Then he told Emily. She cried. Asked what happened. He didn't answer. Then, quietly, he handed her the hammer. I just said it's over, and I went back to my room. Emily, later questioned by Detective Sarah Keene, confirmed the account. She described hearing shouting, then a sudden silence, followed by the garage door closing. She walked downstairs, saw Mason pale and shaking, holding the hammer in both hands. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. She took the hammer from him and, without thinking, went outside. The only thing she knew was that it couldn't be found. I didn't want him to get in trouble. He didn't do it to kill. He did it to stop him. At this point, the physical evidence, digital records, and testimonies all aligned. Timeline: 11:40 p.m. to 12:16 a.m. Security footage, Emily disposing of hammer. Blood evidence on the hammer and on Emily's sweatshirt. Confessions, matching accounts from both siblings. Psychological context, long history of emotional trauma and neglect. The Grayson siblings weren't just suspects. They were now the center of one of Montana's most polarizing criminal cases in decades. But the question looming over Willow Creek wasn't just what happened that night. It was, how will it get this far? She wrote in pencil. Soft, shaky letters, slanted slightly left, like every word was scared to stand up straight. In a worn-out floral notebook, hidden under the mattress in Emily Grayson's room, detectives found the raw, unfiltered truth. Her diary. It wasn't filled with songs or crushes or dreams of college. It was filled with fear, with pleas, with pain so personal you almost felt ashamed to read it. But it was the only voice she had left. March 3rd, he slammed the door again. I was brushing my hair. He said I was ignoring him. I said I was getting ready for school. He said I was lying. Then he stared at me. Just stared. I didn't blink. I wanted to, but I didn't. Because if I moved, maybe he would too. Another entry. This one dated December 12th. He called me lazy because I forgot to empty the dishwasher. I was doing homework. He told me I'd end up useless like my real dad. Then he kicked the table. Mom was at the store. Some entries were little more than counts. 4 days since he yelled at me. 2 weeks since he touched my door. 1 night since I last slept. These weren't just writings. They were survival logs. Detectives shared excerpts with a forensic psychiatrist, Dr. Amelia Renner, brought in by the defense to evaluate both siblings. Her diagnosis was swift and damning. What Emily displays in her journal are classic signs of complex post-traumatic stress disorder, CPTSD. This isn't momentary fear. This is the accumulation of trauma over time, shaped by unpredictability, coercion, and prolonged emotional stress. It rewires the brain. It changes how someone perceives threat and safety. When Dr. Renner interviewed Emily face-to-face, the girl barely made eye contact. She clutched her hands tightly in her lap. But when asked about Carter Grayson, she whispered, "He watched me sleep. Not every night, just when Mom wasn't home." That one sentence made even seasoned investigators go still. It wasn't about bruises. It wasn't about evidence you could photograph. It was about a child who stopped feeling safe inside her own skin. And where was Linda Grayson, the mother, in all of this? That question haunted many. She wasn't charged. Not yet. But her silence spoke volumes. When called to testify before a Family Services Review Board, she broke down mid-sentence. "I didn't want to believe it," she said. "I kept telling myself he'd change. He always apologized. He bought flowers. He said he didn't mean it." But the records told a different story. 1911 call in November 2021, dismissed. 2 anonymous CPS reports in 2020 and 2022, closed as unsubstantiated. A bruised rib photo from 2022, attributed to a fall by the stairs. No follow-up. And yet, behind it all, a storm was brewing. School officials, neighbors, even a friend of Emily's, who shared saved texts with phrases like, "I hate going home. He drinks. Then he shouts. Then he blames me. Mom says just ignore him." People had seen. People had heard. But no one had intervened. Not hard enough. Not soon enough. The day Emily's journal entries were submitted into evidence, the courtroom fell silent. No objections. No cross-examinations. Just silence. Because there was nothing left to say. Every page was a witness. But what about Mason? His role was murkier in the public eye. To some, he was a murderer. To others, a brother pushed past his limit. His letter to the court, handwritten and delivered at sentencing, read in part, "I didn't want to be a killer. I just wanted him to stop. Every day, I saw her break a little more. I saw her cry in silence. I saw her fake sleep when he walked by. I wasn't trying to be a hero. I just didn't want to bury my sister." That line would echo in the courtroom long after he was led away in handcuffs. Experts debated the case on live TV. Podcasts dissected every detail. Social media exploded with outrage, support, confusion, and blame. Was it justice? Or was it too late? The truth, raw and uncomfortable, was this. A girl wrote for years in silence, hoping someone would listen. A boy watched it unfold, helpless, until one night, he snapped. And now, 2 lives, Emily's and Mason's, would never be the same. Some breaking points come in an instant. Others are built over years. Brick by brick, brisa by brisa. Silent night after silent night. For Mason Grayson, it was both. It was the weight of every unopened door. Every whispered, "I'm fine," from his sister. Every unanswered question he had buried inside himself, too scared to ask. Until one night, May 13th, 2024, when his sister came into his room trembling, and he finally couldn't stay silent anymore. He told detectives that he was lying in bed, headphones in, staring at the ceiling when she knocked. Not hard, not loud, just desperate. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there in her hoodie, clutching her sleeves. Then she whispered. He came in. He was already in before I could lock the door. And Mason knew. He knew. This wasn't just yelling. This wasn't just anger. This was something else. Something worse. I told her to stay in my room. I told her not to move. And then I walked downstairs. His hands were shaking. His mind blank. I didn't plan anything. I didn't even know what I was going to say. He opened the garage door. The light was on. There, in the middle of the concrete floor, stood Carter Grayson, beer in hand, shoulders swaying, eyes glassy. "You got something to say, boy?" Carter slurred. Mason froze. Carter took a step forward. "You think you're man now? Telling me what to do in my house." Then came the shove. Not hard, but hard enough. That's when Mason's eyes locked onto the framing hammer on the workbench. And in that moment, everything stopped. I don't even remember thinking. I just remember grabbing it. And then he turned. Mason lifted the hammer with both hands. He took a step forward, and I swung. He said it wasn't rage. It wasn't hate. It was pure fear. Fear for his sister. Fear that if he didn't stop him now, he'd never get another chance. The blow landed on the left side of Carter's temple. Carter stumbled, collapsed. There was no scream, no final words, just a dull, heavy thud and then silence. Mason stood there, staring at the body. Time froze. His mind raced. He didn't check for a pulse. He didn't try to help. He just stood there, paralyzed, until he heard Emily's voice behind him. Mason, she had followed him, and what she saw would stay with her forever. Her brother, the man who protected her, standing over the body of the man who terrorized them both. He looked like someone else, she later said, like he wasn't in his body anymore. Mason turned, handed her the hammer, and said 4 words that would echo forever. "It's over. Get rid of it." Emily didn't ask questions. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just nodded, took the hammer, slipped out the back door, and disappeared into the alley. The camera caught her at 12:16 a.m., crouched behind the garbage bins, tucking the hammer beneath broken-down cardboard and scraps. 2 minutes later, she was back inside. The house was silent again, and by dawn, Carter was dead. The police were knocking, and Mason and Emily's world had changed forever. But even with their confessions, even with all the evidence lining up, there was one lingering question that refused to go away. Did Mason have a choice? Was there another way? Could he have called the police? Told his mother? Locked Emily's door tighter? Or was this the only thing left? To some, Mason was a killer. To others, he was a shield, a boy who stepped in when no one else did. Detective Nolan Pierce described it best. It wasn't cold-blooded. It wasn't calculated. It was a kid pushed to the edge, making an adult decision no kid should ever have to make. And that's what made this case so agonizing. It wasn't black and white. It was all the gray in between. A garage, a hammer, a scream that never came, and a brother who, for the first time, fought back. By the time the sun set on Willow Creek the next day, everyone had an opinion. Some called them monsters. Others called them heroes. But nobody called them safe anymore. On May 15th, 2024, prosecutors made it official. Mason Grayson was charged with second-degree murder, accused of knowingly causing the death of Carter Grayson, without premeditation but with full awareness of his actions. Emily Grayson was charged with criminal facilitation for helping conceal the weapon, obstructing the truth, and withholding key information. Both were booked, processed, and handed over to the custody of the state. The siblings, once inseparable in their trauma, were now separated by steel doors and legal statutes. No contact allowed. Not a word. Not a glance. Not even a letter. Public reaction came fast, and it came hard. Outside the courthouse, crowds began to gather. Some held signs that read, "Justice for Carter. Murder is murder." But others held something different. "Protect survivors, not abusers." Where was CPS? And still others asked a question that no one had a good answer for. If the system didn't protect them, what were they supposed to do? In the weeks that followed, prosecutors and defense teams prepared for a trial that would test the limits of justice, compassion, and truth. Leading the state's case was Deputy District Attorney Mark Temple, a by-the-book prosecutor with a record of tough convictions. His stance was clear. The defendant made a choice. He had time. He had options. But instead of picking up a phone, he picked up a hammer. He painted Mason as a young man capable of restraint, but unwilling to use it. He painted Emily as someone who could have told the truth sooner, but instead chose to hide it. In the courtroom, he gestured toward the jury and said, "This is not a case about trauma. This is a case about control. And when that control slipped, someone died." But the defense had a very different story to tell. Representing Mason was Angela Price, a quiet but formidable public defender known for her work in child advocacy law. Her strategy? Not denial, not deflection, context. She told the court, "You can't understand what happened in that garage until you understand what happened in that house." She didn't argue the facts. Mason hit Carter. She didn't argue the result. Carter died. What she did argue was why. The defense presented a timeline of trauma. Emily's diary, screenshots of notes app entries, text messages to school counselors, photos of bruises, 2 anonymous CPS reports, a 911 call from Linda Grayson in 2021, and most haunting of all, a recording. A neighbor's Ring camera had picked up audio through an open garage window just 3 months earlier. It wasn't clear, but the voices were identifiable. "Carter, you think I won't? You think I won't knock that smug look off your face?" Emily, inaudible, "I didn't do anything." Then a loud crash. And silence. The courtroom held its breath. On the stand, Dr. Amelia Renner, the forensic psychiatrist, explained the concept of reactive protection, when children in prolonged environments of fear are pushed into defensive action, not by logic but by survival instinct. In Mason's mind, she said, the threat was not just imminent. It was permanent. And that night, it finally had to end. She diagnosed both siblings with complex PTSD, validated through psychological evaluations conducted after their arrest. Then came Emily's testimony. Soft-spoken, tearful, but composed. She described everything. How Carter would drink, how he watched her, how he got close, how she'd sleep with a chair pressed against the door, holding her breath every time a floorboard creaked. And then she said this: "I didn't throw the hammer away to hide what we did. I threw it away because I knew what the world would call us." A hush fell over the room, because everyone knew she was right. Finally, Linda Grayson took the stand. And for the first time, she didn't cry. She looked tired. "Hollow. I ignored it," she said. "I thought I was keeping peace in the house. But I was feeding a fire." When asked if she believed her children were in danger, she paused. "Yes, I just didn't know what to do." And maybe that's what made it worse. Because she wasn't evil. She wasn't cruel. She was just passive. And in that passivity, her children suffered. As the trial drew to a close, the town of Willow Creek was more divided than ever. Was this justice? Or was it just the fallout of a system that waited too long to intervene? The closing arguments were delivered on October 18th. The jury was handed the case. And for the next 10 hours, no one slept. October 19th, 2024. The air in the courtroom felt heavier than usual. Still, dense. The kind of silence that wraps around your neck like a noose. At 4:52 p.m., after nearly 10 hours of deliberation, the jury returned. 12 men and women. Some stoic, others pale, none smiling. Judge Catherine Lowell, firm, deliberate, asked the foreperson to rise. In the matter of the state of Montana versus Mason Grayson. A pause. We find the defendant guilty of second-degree murder. A sharp intake of breath swept through the courtroom. And then, in the matter of the state of Montana versus Emily Grayson, we find the defendant guilty of criminal facilitation. Some gasped. Others bowed their heads. But no one cheered. Because how could you? There were no winners here. Only grief, dressed up as justice. Outside, the courthouse steps became a war zone of emotion. On one side, justice for Carter. He didn't deserve to die. You don't get to kill your problems. On the other, free Mason. She was just a child. Where was CPS when it mattered? News crews circled like vultures. Social media boiled with outrage, empathy, and everything in between. The story spread fast. Local tragedy turned national debate. Even talk shows picked it up. The headlines varied. Montana teen convicted in stepdad's death. Was it murder or mercy? Teen siblings sentenced after years of alleged abuse go unchecked. Justice served or justice denied? The sentencing hearing was scheduled for November 6th. The courtroom was packed. Press, victims' rights groups, child advocates, classmates, teachers. Even the judge looked exhausted. A clinical evaluation summary was presented first. Both Mason and Emily Grayson had been diagnosed with complex trauma, emotional neglect, and in Mason's case, depressive reactive disorder, a result of long-term exposure to fear and helplessness. The prosecution didn't argue against the trauma, but they insisted the law is the law. Deputy District Attorney Mark Temple stood and addressed the court. We can feel sympathy. We can acknowledge pain, but we cannot condone vigilantism. This court must draw a line between reaction and responsibility. Then came Angela Price, Mason's attorney. Her voice shook slightly, but not from nerves, from passion. What happens when the people meant to protect children fail? What happens when the teachers file reports, the friends see bruises, the mother looks away, and still, nothing changes? She looked directly at the jury box, even though the jurors were no longer seated. We called it a system failure. But when a teenager takes one terrible, irreversible step to stop the suffering, we suddenly remember how to enforce the rules. Before sentencing, both siblings were allowed to speak. Emily, eyes red but dry, stepped forward. She didn't make excuses. She didn't ask for pity. I'm not angry about going to prison. I'm just sad I had to grow up in one before I ever got here. She sat down. The courtroom was frozen. Then Mason stood. He unfolded a piece of paper. Handwritten. Worn. He looked at it, and then folded it again. I had a speech, but none of it matters. What matters is she's alive. She gets to grow up, and I can live with that. Judge Lowell took her time. More than 3 hours of statements, reports, and quiet contemplation. Then the gavel fell. Mason Grayson, 18 years in the Montana State prison system. Eligible for parole after 12. Emily Grayson, 10 years in a youth correctional facility. Eligible for supervised release after 6. No outbursts. No applause. Just stunned silence. Because the gavel didn't just end the trial. It ended a chapter in the lives of 2 children who had already endured too much. Later that week, the Grayson home was vacated. All belongings removed under court supervision. The property was listed and quietly sold. Linda Grayson, their mother, relocated to Missoula. No charges were filed against her, but she remained under family services review. She was seen attending trauma recovery meetings. She didn't speak to the press, and maybe that was for the best. Mason was transferred to Montana State Prison in Deer Lodge, placed under protective classification due to the nature of the crime. He kept to himself, attended counseling. No disciplinary issues in his first 60 days. Emily began trauma therapy at a youth facility in Helena. She declined media interviews. She kept her head down, but staff said she smiled once. Just once. When asked what she wanted to do someday, she said, "Right, maybe help other girls like me." Because even behind bars, somewhere inside her, there was still a girl who believed she had something left to give. Even after the verdicts were read. Even after the gavel fell, even after the prison doors closed behind Mason and Emily Grayson, the town of Willow Creek did not find peace. In the weeks following the sentencing, the Monroe County Courthouse became the focal point of national attention. News anchors debated the fairness of the sentence. Child advocacy groups held vigils. Law students wrote essays. Podcasts dissected every second of courtroom audio. But underneath all the noise was one simple, heartbreaking truth. Nobody could agree on what justice looked like anymore. On November 21st, 2024, Mason's defense team filed an official appeal. The basis? Mitigating circumstances, including long-term exposure to documented emotional and psychological abuse, compounded by system negligence and lack of protective intervention. The appeal was accepted for review by the Montana Supreme Court in January 2025. No hearing date had been set, but in the meantime, Mason remained at Deer Lodge Prison, quietly serving time, participating in weekly therapy, maintaining a clean behavioral record. He hadn't spoken to the media. He hadn't issued a public statement. But according to prison chaplains and counselors, he's not angry. He's not bitter. He's just tired. Emily, now 18, remained in custody at Helena Youth Rehabilitation Center, enrolled in both trauma-focused therapy and a distance education program. She'd begun writing short stories, fiction mostly, stories about girls who turned into warriors, stories about locked doors and what lived behind them. Counselors said her progress was measured but hopeful. She still refused all media contact. She hadn't asked for early release, but she'd asked for books and paper and quiet. Meanwhile, their mother, Linda Grayson, remained under state supervision by Montana Family Services. She wasn't arrested. She wasn't charged. But her silence had cost her everything. The house was gone. The community turned its back. And the children she thought she was protecting? One was in prison. The other was healing behind barbed wire. In February 2025, under public pressure, the Montana Department of Public Health and Human Services released select portions of previous CPS records, specifically those connected to the Grayson family. The documents revealed what many had feared. 2 anonymous calls, one in March 2020, the other in July 2022, reporting emotional abuse and inappropriate behavior toward Emily by her stepfather, Carter Grayson. Both cases had been closed within 30 days. Both cited the same reasons. No physical evidence. Lack of cooperation from the family. Unsubstantiated. The backlash was immediate. Editorials flooded newspapers. Teachers wrote open letters demanding lower thresholds for intervention. Advocacy groups filed petitions. Town meetings overflowed with grieving citizens. And one phrase echoed again and again. This didn't have to happen. The Grayson case became more than a headline. It became a case study. University law symposiums dissected the psychological factors behind Mason's actions. Debates emerged over the legal weight of trauma-informed defense. Therapists and legal scholars sat across panels discussing what qualifies as imminent threat when fear is a constant, not a moment. But in the heart of Willow Creek, things stayed quiet. The house on Buttermill Drive was bought by a private buyer in December 2024. The garage was remodeled. The workbench torn down. The hammer, Exhibit A, remained sealed in an evidence locker at Yellowstone County Sheriff's Office. It won't be released. Not until Mason's appeal concludes. And maybe not even then, because some objects are too heavy to hold again. To this day, Emily and Mason have not seen each other. The no-contact order remains in place. 2 siblings, once united in fear and love and desperation, now separated by law and grief and time. But there is a final entry in Emily's diary, recovered during the investigation but not read aloud in court. Dated the night after Carter's death, scrawled in pen, barely legible. There's no yelling, no footsteps, no breathing through the wall, just silence. I don't know if that's peace, but it's something, and maybe that's all that's left for any of us in the end. Not justice, not vengeance, just something. A silence where screams used to live. A stillness where fear once ruled. A story told so it doesn't happen again.